I'm Lauren Gunderson, and I wrote the play The Book of Will.
And I am Christopher Moore. I'll be directing it.
The fact is, we know that Shakespeare's friends collected his plays and published them in the First Folio, but most of us don't really know how that came to be and how complicated and exacting and surprising and riveting the process actually was. And in many ways, the events that unfolded to make the First Folio possible were like a great Shakespeare play. You've got villains, you've got love stories, you've got losses, you've got stakes that are really high. So in looking at the history and in looking at what I know about a life in the theater and a life working with actors and storytellers, it felt like a perfect story for now and for the ages, really. Yeah, so where we meet our characters, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, we find them a few years after their best friend and one of their fellow actors, William Shakespeare, has died. And they are reminiscing about times with him, performances, the great good old days of being on stage with him. And we get to know them and their wives and daughters and the other friends and colleagues who are still a part of the Kingsmen. But it starts in a moment of nostalgia. And then, of course, it occurs to Henry that, it would be so nice to see these plays collected again. Where is that copy of As You Like It? Does anyone have the latest version or the last version we did of this play or that play? And so the audience will come to realize that they don't have all of the plays anymore. Nobody knows where they are. And of course, we realize even further that even if you had some of the plays, oftentimes only one actor would have just their character's lines. So Burbage would have all of Othello, but what Iago's lines were, I can't remember. So we set the stage with the love of Shakespeare, the love of the plays, the fact that the plays are still resonant to these people years after they perform them. But where are they? And that should send a chill down any Shakespeare fan's back of thinking that half the plays are gone. At this moment in history, they're not published by anyone else. And by published, I usually mean stolen, because at this point, there wasn't a copyright. So there were copies of Hamlet, copies of Macbeth that were in circulation through cheap printing. But they might have said William Shakespeare, but they weren't. There was no guarantee that that's actually what was performed or written by Shakespeare. So you have a combination of these shoddy copies of plays, totally missing copies, only halves or quarters of plays, again, pirated versions, and it just, you suddenly realize the mess in which these friends are in. And thus begins the first realization of we should get these plays together. We should make sure they're safe, they're collected, they're preserved, not only because we loved these plays, but because we loved Will. Will was our friend, and he and all of the other actors that have passed that we used to play with, we should do the right thing and make sure that their legacy and our legacy and the world of these beautiful stories is preserved. So that sets into motion a bit of a caper, leading to them to all parts of London, to find the plays, to gather them, to edit them, to make sure that they're actually to the best of their knowledge, what their friend Will wrote. And then the other impossible task of actually printing it, not only finding the paper, the right publisher, who's capable and a commendable enough person to trust, but raising the money, it's on and on, how many things were stacked against them. And so we follow them through all of these challenges and the roller coaster of this task, knowing that for them, the reason to not give up is because of that heartful connection to their friend and the belief that this is something bigger than themselves and even bigger than Will, their friend, and it's worth fighting for and worth doing right.
And the one thing I will add that, those of us who work in the theater, we have the great, we're lucky that we get to swim in his plays, and we know when we assemble a script for rehearsal, we're pulling from the folio or a quarto. We're pulling from lots of different versions to assemble what we are going to rehearse. There's not really an official version, and there's such there's an entire industry around publishing Shakespeare's work. So we tend to think of it as a done deal, right? Mm-hmm. That this is what he wanted, this is what we're supposed to be reading, there's scholarship about it, there's research about it. But the reason we have that, and the reason there is this entire worldwide industry about it, is because of the choices that a few individuals made in the years after he died to preserve these works. If they hadn't done that, the OSF wouldn't exist, right? It's because these people who knew him, loved his plays, wanted to preserve them. And I love that Lauren has captured that incredibly human moment, that it comes out of love for this man and his words, and that's why we're all here getting to do what we do today. It's just extraordinary. First and foremost, I was very moved by the story and the relationships. Very, very moved. Every time I read it, it gets me. And I also felt that Lauren, it was like she had written a play for OSF, for the company here. There are very few places left in this country where there's an acting company, and where there's an acting company where relationships go back decades and decades, and people have played opposite each other as Henry, and as Hal and Hotspur or whatever. You just cannot find that out there in the world, and Lauren's play is so much about those relationships and what they mean and how they are unique to the theater in a way. What it means to have created these worlds on stage and these relationships on stage with each other, and when you go through that, what it means for you off stage as a person, and your relationship as not just a colleague but as a friend, when you share something as intense as doing a great play like a Lear or Romeo and Juliet, or Much Ado or As You. So it felt like she had written it for this company, and so I said I would love to direct it. I think some folks may have thought upon first read, because Lauren has written a pretty intimate story. It has a huge scope, but in the telling of it, it's intimate. And usually, I think people wouldn't think of that kind of scale or intimacy for the Elizabethan because it's such a big space. But I felt, and I think Bill Rausch felt, that the play's heart and the ambition of the play emotionally needed to be in that container of the Elizabethan, the space on our campus that really holds the legacy of OSF and the history of OSF so profoundly. And to think about Lauren's, the beauty of what she has written on that stage, which was the start of this institution and has seen so many actors and is, beautifully haunted by the ghosts of so many performances under the stars, just felt like a perfect match, that it had to be there and not anyplace else. So I am very excited to see what we can do with her beautiful play out there.
So the play is set in the more intimate spaces of the lives of these men and women, including a tap house or a bar that was connected to the theater that was owned by John Hemmings. So we have this bar setting where I imagined, as is the case now, actors go to the bar after the show. They talk about plays of yore, what they just did, what they've seen lately. So it has this very kind of avuncular feeling, a feeling of camaraderie. And we have some more domestic spaces, and then we have, of course, the stage of that hollowed theater. And of course, what's cool about that is we are on a stage, because we'll be outside at the beautiful Elizabethan Theater, and the kind of, as Chris was mentioning, the reverberations of time and people that have been on that space in a play about that space and those people. It has this a sense of the rhythm of time happening again and again, and the sense of this is where we've always been over the many years. So I hope it has a lovely chill to it. And the time period we're set is 1619, and the plays were published in 1623. So it's that short period of time that all of this work was happening.
I also think thematically the play really looks at loss, right? The loss. They're mourning the loss of their friend, this great writer, and for those of us in the theater, that sense of, okay, well, I'm not 21 and playing ingenues anymore. What is the legacy we want to leave behind? What has been, examining what our contribution has been, and how we feel about that. What has the value been in these relationships that I have with my fellow actors, the collaborators that I work with, and I feel like Lauren has captured it's about folks who've been doing this for a while, who have been in the theater for decades, and it's not about the newness and the discovery and the, oh my God, I can't believe I'm playing Romeo or Juliet. It's not about that. It's about looking back at what have I done, and what did that mean to me then? What does it mean to us now? And do you remember that when we did that? And I just find that very, very moving. And the thought of the actors from this company who have those relationships going back years and years and years, being able to play that for our audience is very powerful.
And there's also a bit of a metaphor in the entire pursuit of theater, which is this temporality, this ephemerality of a performance. You don't keep it. You can't keep it. Chris's brilliant performance as Richard is in our minds, but it's not here anymore. And so in some ways that's a metaphor for mortality, for life. Theater is that thing that you can't keep, but you keep somewhere in your heart and mind. And playwriting is one of the only things about theater that you do keep, or you can keep. And so the fact of them trying to capture that moment in time, because they did capture it, and this story is about the great lengths and sacrifices that led to them capturing it. We get to do that now. We get your Richard now.
You
we get
capture
over
that
and over again.
so beautifully in the last moments of the play, where the folio is assembled, right? And they've done it, right? They've accomplished this great thing, and then I won't give away who says what, but basically, it's like there's someone who says, well, now you have to read it out loud. Because they're plays, right? They're supposed to be spoken out loud with people hearing them. And I just love that you captured that.
Well, they spend so much time trying to get it on the page.
Yeah, get it on the page.
But the point is for it not to be on the page.
Right, right.
Yeah, and that is the heart of theater. And the idea, the kind of wonderful, spooky thrill of it is that because of their work, we have a Romeo now, and everywhere in the world there is Shakespeare being done. I would wager that every second of the day, someone is speaking some Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And the idea that started because of this group of people who weren't doing it for money and weren't doing it for fame. They were doing it because they believed in the stories. They believed that plays matter, stories matter, and they believed in their friend. And that thing that is bigger than themselves, that is bigger than one time, one location. That takes a lot of faith in humanity and in art, and it takes a lot of good work by real people. And I hope that honors this, so that we as artists and as audiences get the thrill we get when we see a beautiful production of Shakespeare that enlivens us and enlightens us.